Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review The Incredibles 2. So, since it's been a while, I figure I might as well just briefly talk about how I felt about the first Incredibles very briefly. It has been a while since I've seen the first Incredibles, so maybe I did forget a few things here along the way, since this movie does pick up right where the last one left off. But nonetheless, I do think that Incredibles was a fine movie, the first one that being, and its fineness, I think, really came from everything culminating at the end of the movie. You know, the rest of the movie kind of builds up to the family finally uniting as superheroes and finally working together, and that's when the movie becomes its strongest. It was when we see that all of them do their thing together. So let's get into this. Incredibles 2. So we start with this interrogation with Violet's potential boyfriend named Tony, who was actually apparently there with I forget the villain's name. He was like this drill creature man thing. I wrote it in my notes somewhere later, but whatever. Anyways, so we see Mr. Incredible going in, and we see them sort of, again, just revisiting that scene that we see at the end of the first movie. And then we see Tony sort of hiding under the car, and then seeing Violet without her mask. So they make him forget that he saw any of that. Meanwhile, the drill, I'll just call him the drill man, because I honestly don't remember what his name was. I'm sorry, if that, whatever. Anyways, he manages to get away with the money. But Mr. Freeze helps out as the actual drill itself continues to go, causing havoc. And Violet and Dash are also going in, but they have to take care of Jack. So Dash runs up ahead, gives the baby back, Jack back. Mr. Incredible helps out from the inside, and Freeze helps out from the outside. So Violet, uses her abilities as well, and so on and so forth. Oh, Underminer, that's what his name was. I wrote his name a little bit later in the notes. So Underminer does get away. So already the movie can set up a potential third movie right from the get-go, because, spoiler alert now, he kind of just gets away, interestingly enough. Yeah, they never really do anything about that in the end of this movie. So their informant, Rick, who allowed them to do the whole superhero thing before, can't help them anymore, but he's allowed to help them one last time. So the family takes some time to immediately talk about what just happened and each of their stances of what being a superhero is and why the whole being a superhero part is illegal, and so on and so forth. So they get a visit from Freeze, who rejoins them afterwards. And he rejoins them after getting some intel on this potential person that wants to help them. So Violet sees the mother leaving with the costume as they go out and meet Winston and his sister. When they arrive to this fancy building, he talks about how his family was associated with helping former heroes, and then how he passed away. And he starts to talk about how people don't see the fight, but they see the perception of what the news shows, and that is just the carnage of what happens afterwards. So he wants to install cameras on each of the heroes, so that way when they go out, they are able to do their thing and get the recognition that they deserve. So he wants to at first send out at least one of them, so he chooses Elastigirl because based off of the statistics, she was more careful. Generally, she was able to get less harm done. And then afterwards, we see her talk to the sister, and then they mentioned the whole female empowerment thing, which I also agree with the Black Critic guy. I just saw his review before making this, that was a bit unnecessary, the whole female empowerment aspect. They could have cut that scene out completely and nothing would have changed. But yes, they are in the... Anyways, the family is invited to the house, and they start, looking around and stuff. So the kids go to school, and Mr. Incredible stays with them. And meanwhile, Elastigirl sets out on her first mission. So we see that Mr. Incredible has his hands full with Dash needing help with math, Jack just not wanting to sleep, and Violet just being all torn over Tony. So we cut back to Elastigirl, and we see this train that starts to go backwards, and we see that Elastigirl uses her powers along with the bike, or motorcycle, to catch up to it. Just in time as well. So she gets inside and sees that this message is left for her, left by our new villain, whose name I also wrote later, so I'll just leave that there for now. Anyways, we see Mr. Incredible try to talk to Violet about the situation that she's going through, but she doesn't want to at the time. Meanwhile, Jack associates a raccoon with a robber because the baby sees the robber, and then it sees the raccoon taking something and just associates that as being the same thing. So it starts to fight the raccoon for a bit using its multiple powers that we as the audience seen in the first movie, but apparently the family didn't. I thought they did. That's the part I didn't remember in the first movie, if they had seen Jack using his powers or not. Apparently they didn't, because they are all surprised. Yeah, and I thought there was that little extra thing at the end of The Incredibles, that little mini movie where it's like the babysitter like calls saying that stuff is like getting freaky, and I thought they figured it out again at that point. But again, I guess not. I don't know. Maybe it's just been too long and I just don't remember that, but whatever. So yes. It does its multiple powers, so on and so forth. And Bob is unable to get any sleep. But he does start to slowly get better at being a family man. So when we cut back to Tony, he doesn't apparently know Violet anymore at all. And Elastigirl talks to one of the individuals who becomes hypnotized during one of their little like press conferences, I guess I'll call it. So she gives chase to this culprit that is flying via helicopter. So, in some of the other ones is the mayor, so she helps out them to safety. And then we cut back to our situation with Violet and Mr. Incredible, who mentions that he did in fact erase Tony's memory, and she gets mad and runs off. And she's like, "Oh, I don't want to be a superhero anymore. I hate the powers. I hate being a superhero," and so on and so forth. So while that's going on, we cut back to Elastigirl, who's meeting all these other heroes who were apparently from other parts of the world. Even though in the first movie I thought that it was implied that they were the only ones left. So that to me kind of, the whole thing with them getting these superheroes to be hypnotized later in the movie kind of is a it kind of ruins the continuity of the first movie a little bit there, don't you think? Like, I could have sworn they said all the superheroes, like, the only ones left were the Incredibles and Mr. Freeze. They were the only ones left. But regardless, there are apparently other superheroes that were in hiding this whole time. So, anyways, I'm just trying to catch up on where my notes were. So, yes. She goes out, blah, blah, blah. And then afterwards, she decides to talk to the other lady about what's more important, the person that sells stuff or the person that invents it in the first place. And then she admits that the seller would eventually be more important. And I do believe this is their second meeting after the more unnecessary one where she's like, "Oh, you were like in the shadow of Mr. Incredible, and you deserve to be the face because female empowerment." And again, I do believe that message is kind of lost when, in fact, the first Incredibles only became good to me was when they united as a family, not just like one stood out among the others. It was everyone working as a group unit. It was everyone working as a team. It was everyone working as a family. And I do think that the writing here kind of lost that along the way. And she's not the only character that suffers through this, by the way, and I'll get to that in a bit. But because there's sort of like these little side stories that happen, but I do want to just get through my little notes that I did have here. So anyways, so Bob afterwards calls Rick, trying to help Violet out, trying to figure out what Tony's situation is. So they go to the store where he works, or the restaurant where he works, and he serves them, and she sort of freaks out. Violet goes off again. Meanwhile, Elastigirl starts tracking our villain, whose name I still didn't write. I just kept writing villain. So she uses a frequency to track the villain into this building. And she starts having to fight the villain blind because the entire room is this hypnosis type of room. Any minute, and the villain manages to flee from her. And once she catches him, we do see that it was some guy who apparently didn't know what happened. So, eventually the other two kids find out the Jack has powers as well, and the dad had already known that, and he starts freaking out, basically saying how he was trying to take care of the family as it was. And after that, he starts showing off that the powers to Mr. Freeze there. It was like, whoa, holy moly. So Mr. Incredible wants to let the baby, be with, I think her name is Esna? The, fashion, the one that makes their costumes. Her name's like Esna or something like that. Um, Anyways, she, like, takes them in, creates a new modified suit for the baby. She, like, lets him in this little containment room where the baby shows off more of its powers, and so on and so forth. So, meanwhile, they set up this big meeting to get all the superheroes on the boat, and that's sort of where things start to go, wait a minute, that seems like a suspicious thing all of a sudden. So yes, I'll just leave that as it is, the notes for now. Meanwhile, Elastigirl goes off on her own, doing her own thing. You know, and we kind of continue off of the trend of Mr. Incredible starting to want to be a good dad. And he finally falls asleep. He's finally able to get some rest after his fatigue. So Elastigirl goes, she's like noticing all these small little things about the villain that she was fighting, and she starts to place everything together, but it's too late. She gets controlled by the lady, the sister of the guy that was like, oh, superheroes. Meanwhile, Esna starts explaining the state of Jack's powers, how each one is sort of activated. And I finally wrote the note of what the villain's name was, Screenslaver. And yes, it is indeed the sister, and when the brother has no idea that it was her either. So this slaver character, the sister, thinks superheroes makes everyone else weaker, and that's why that's the only reason she's sort of doing this. So she gets Mr. Incredible to go out because you know, she mentions how Elastigirl is not being herself or whatever. Meanwhile, the other controlled heroes that we have seen come to their house. I don't know how they find out where they. Well, actually, no, that does make sense since the sister was there with them. So yes, the controlled heroes get to the house where they were hiding, or where they were just staying. And Freeze is actually just there with them still, that being the kids that are still left. But along the interesting fight, they take control over Freeze, and it's actually left for the kids to escape while Bob fights Elastigirl, and Elastigirl takes him over. So again, it is up to the kids. And thank God that they did this in the movie. They left it to the kids to sort of figure this out. And again, I kind of have to go back to the whole female empowerment thing. I was a little bit worried that they were just going to leave it. So it was like, oh, Elastigirl just does everything. And it's just like, well, that's not even what the first movie was about. It was about them working as a family. And now with both the parents being controlled, again, it's left to the remaining parts of the family to save them. So yes, it is up to indeed Violet, Dash, and Jack to save the parents. So they get the Mr. Incredible's car, they get to the boat via the car being able to go on the water as well, and Violet tries to go on ahead to look on with the situation. Jack just starts leaving, trying to find his mom, and then Violet fights one of the superheroes that were controlled, named Void, whose main purpose is just to be a fangirl. That's her entire character, essentially. And then they start using this tracker to try to find Jack, that being both of them, because they end up losing Jack. And more of the controlled heroes start to move in on the baby. But Jack gets super big and super fat and starts just moving along. He even breaks the monitor. And while that's going on, the parents, as well as Mr. Freeze, start sending this message that they're like, oh, we don't want to be superheroes because they're being controlled, obviously. And they take over the ship. They make sure that that the ship is taken over by them. The guy is able to send the message that the superheroes are doing this, and that this would make sure that superheroes get banned forever. But it ends up being Jack who frees Elastigirl, and Elastigirl is then able to free Bob, and then I believe she also does freeze, or Mr. Incredible does freeze. It was either one of them two. Regardless of which one it was, they start to fight together as a family, thank God, and start to take care of all the other controlled superheroes that were there. So yes, they are able to get through that, and then they work together to try to stop the boat. But Mr. Incredible has to do one last superhero, which his name is Crush. His ability is to crush things, apparently. And then Elastigirl sets up to stop the slaver and gets a little help, a little assist from Void, creating these dimensional portals that sort of just move her along into where they need to be. Meanwhile, Mr. Incredible goes underwater to turn the boat to avoid the boat hitting the mainland. The brother, who's all about the superhero helping stuff, he helps the others get off the boat as well, or he helps them move to another location at the very most. And they are indeed able to turn the boat. So Freeze snows up as they are about to crash and is able to soften everything up, make sure nothing gets too messed up, and the situation just sort of settles down. So afterwards, Violet apologizes to Void really quick, and then Dash gets the car because he's super excited about it, and then that sort of just goes on about. And then the legality of the heroes is finally restored. And then Violet gets to kind of re-meet Tony, and their relationship sort of gets to start over from there. But the family starts to ride to a movie, but a robbery is in progress, so Violet leaves Tony to buy some stuff to set up before they can go see the movie, and then the Incredibles ride off to stop basic crime. And that is the end of Incredibles 2. And again, there is a setup for Incredibles 3. As I mentioned, the villain that they kind of leave, the drill guy, he doesn't get stopped. He gets away. That's really weird that they did that. I don't know if that was their plan, if they wanted to do Incredibles 3, if they wanted to continue this Joe guy's thing. So that is a possibility for a third movie. The other thing I've kind of wanted to see the Incredibles deal with, especially now at the end of where this movie leaves off, I do think the best next direction to take the Incredibles is to deal with sort of what other sort of superheroes have also dealt with before. That one uh, superhero or supervillain, I should say, that has the ability to remove powers. I do think that that would be an interesting third chapter for the Incredibles 3 to take as well. I do think that would be most interesting to the character of Violet, who just got into a relationship with Tony again. Um, choosing powers over a stable relationship, and because he doesn't have powers, dealing with that, I think that would be a good step to take um, for a third movie. And yes, and secondarily stopping the drill guy, because that has to be stopped. Or am I just crazy in thinking that they just leave him to take all that money and he goes off? Um, but I did mention I was going to talk more about individual characters and how I feel like some of the setup of some of them kind of get again ruined. A little bit, and it happens mainly in the middle of the movie. Again, with Elastigirl and the whole female empowerment thing, I do think that scene is completely unnecessary to even have in the movie. Again, I do think that this movie works best when it's a family unit. It's all of them working together, all of them using their powers. Um, so, again, unnecessary scene for her. I also think Dash was a little bit underplayed here as well. Like in the first movie, yeah, he was a little bit annoying, but then he kind of gets over that, helping the sister when they get on the island. Um, they were still on each other's nerves, but they do work together. I do think that they kind of reset him a little bit here, back to his default annoying state. I do think that was a little bit well, okay, that's a bit odd, but whatever. Um, I do think Violet's story is a little bit interesting. It's definitely more interesting than Elastigirl's. I do think Violet, again, I even said that has the potential to be a part of the third movie if they want to go that route with the whole power thing. So they did do stuff with that. The whole thing with Jack Jack, it was cute and funny and whatever. Again, I just didn't remember if they had seen him using his powers or not, but that's just on me. I could have just forgot. As far as Mr. Incredible goes, I do think him sort of being jealous was also a little bit unnecessary. Because it kind of just breaks away from that, and then he's just like, oh, I'll just be a good family man or whatever. So again, I do think the parents were a little bit pushed back, as well as Dash was a bit pushed back. But again, when the family reunites for the third act, I do think that is when the movie is at its strongest. Again, it is when they are working together when this movie is at its strongest. And I think the writers kind of forgot about that a little bit here, and it shows. As far as the villain is concerned, I mean, it is a bit underplayed, but I actually kind of do like that. I know not everyone will, but I do think that a more subdued villain was a bit necessary for the type of villain that it is. More behind the scenes, more just doing this. I do wish that there was a bit more of the actual, her, what's her name again? The villain's name, Slaver. I do think that there should have been a bit more of her taking over, actual individuals to show that that's what what her thing was. But I do understand it a little bit as well, because they had to deal with the first villain, which they never solved anyway, and they had to do all that. So, at the end of the day, I think I'm going to give this movie a 6 out of 10. I do think that it reaches slightly below average because of the individual stories just not being that strong. Again, the third act really helps build this movie back up from being a halfway decent movie. So yeah, I do think that this is definitely capable of doing an Incredibles 3. Hopefully, again, they do one of the routes that I suggested. But I don't know. I'm not the writer. I don't ultimately decide what the Incredibles 3 is going to be. But it does seem a bit odd that they would just leave the Joe guy just to go about his day and just continue doing what he did. He just escaped. And again, I do think a very interesting superhero thing to do would be to do the thing with the superhero or supervillain that can take away his superpowers. And seeing how the family deals with that. So, that is my thoughts. 6 out of 10. I do think that that's the verdict here. And that is my review of The Incredibles 2. And if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description. I'll head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.